How about Tommy in Newport News?
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Tommy,
Hi, Matt.
how you doing?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
All right, hey. I'm doing well. I'm just calling about the authorship of Matthew. Last week you mentioned that Matthew is anonymous, and I just want to note for you that Tacitus' annals are also anonymous.
Yeah.
And we get our first description to Tacitus from Tertullian 100 years after the fact.
Yeah.
But for Matthew, our first description is from Papias, only about 50 years after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to know how that's not special pleading for you to deny the authorship of Matthew when we have actually better evidence for Matthew than we do for Tacitus.
I'm not saying that the authorship is necessarily wrong. I'm saying that we have no idea who the author is, and if we find out secondhand, as we would find out from Tacitus, etc. Can I finish? You asked me a question. Sure. I mean, I've already seen your video where you agree with me while you're disagreeing with me. But
no.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
And then you adopt a particular tone at the end of your video that makes me sound like I don't sound. And so I like the fact that both of the videos are up there so people can go compare, because it was a bit silly. My point was, when you're judging the authorship of the book by the standards that we would normally use if we were judging any other work from history. Right. However, that has nothing to do with mythical claims. And you cannot say that we can go ahead and say this is Matthean authorship based on the same standards that we might use somewhere else, and then also say, therefore, the stuff is necessarily true. My only point was that we don't have an autograph. We don't know who the author is. The names were ascribed by the church, and there are reasons to believe that Matthew wasn't the author, because there's no reason for an eyewitness to rely so heavily on other accounts.
Matt, could I just address that real quick?
Sure.
You mentioned that it was mythical, but I just want to note here that Matthew is actually ancient bioi, and that's become the consensus since Richard Burridge authored his book, What Are the Gospels? And that's how the Gospels are actually biography, and they are intended to be history. They are not midrash. They are intended as historical documents.
And how many other history books do we consider true that talk about zombies?
I'm sorry, but this is a presupposition against miracles you're making, and you're going on a human argument.
No, it's not a presupposition against miracles.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not. What it is how do we determine whether or not a particular claim is justified? Even if Matthew wrote the book and it was written by an eyewitness, that still doesn't mean that the events actually happened.
Hold on, Matt. You said even if it was written by an eyewitness, that doesn't mean it actually happened. But here, I think, why doesn't it mean it happened? Because it mentioned zombies, quote unquote.
Yes.
But yeah, I know you said that, but you deny Christianity.
Okay, stop. There are people living today who you can walk over and go talk to, who will tell you about their experience of being abducted by aliens. Would you believe them?
Now, I've actually investigated this because...
Would you believe them?
Can I finish, please? Actually, the experiences with aliens, almost all of them, or at least all I've investigated, come from later hypnotic accounts, and they are actually using hypnotic suggestion onto them. So it is not at all similar, because Jesus was not a hypnotist.
So you're saying there are no accounts, no testimonials that aren't the result of something like hypnosis?
Not of alien abductions, no, sir.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, but you're just wrong. You're making yet another broad-based claim that there are no one of these. You've done this several times.
I mean, example to the contrary, though.
I gave you a hypothetical. What
about...
Stop. What about all of the other claims of other religions that claim miracles? Do you believe them as well?
No, sir, because the evidence is totally different. Now, you might refer to...
No, the evidence is not different.
Could you provide me an example?
The Quran?
No, the Quran was not written by an eyewitness. It does not include miracles. Actually, the miracles are found in the Hadith, and even Muslim scholars dismiss the Hadith. Miracles are not found in the Quran.
Really?
Really.
Okay.
So you can't provide me an example, can you?
Off the top of my head, can I provide you an example? No.
Well, you seem to you claim to know the information well, but you can't provide me examples. And your entire denial of the resurrection... I don't have
to provide you examples of other religions. I'm talking about what standards of evidence I would use in order to determine whether an account is believable or not. And an anonymous book, even if we think we might know who the authorship was, which is not necessarily the case, talking about miracle claims is not sufficient evidence to believe the claim.
Why not?
Because why should it be? I heard from some guy, or you tell me that this happened to you, and I have no other evidence other than your word that this happened. It's not sufficient to believe that. If you use that as a standard of evidence, you would be believing all sorts of contradictory claims and all sorts of unreal claims.
It's much more likely
If that
it's
is an
made up.
acceptable standard of evidence for you, then it's not surprising that you find this stuff convincing.
Matt, you said that I would be believing all sorts of contradictory stuff, but you couldn't actually provide me an example of something else. So
I
I'm just
did.
gonna-
You said it's not
No, you
there.
didn't.
I don't have an encyclopedia at my fingertips, so I
I
cannot
don't,
provide
it's
you
not
the
there.
counter, and I'm trying to save time.
I've looked into it. It's not there. It's not there. So please don't make claims that you cannot back up right here.
I didn't make a claim. I
Yes,
asked
you did.
for...
You said I'd be believing contradictory things. You have not been able to back that up. I want
I
you to
said
back that up.
if you used that standard of evidence, you would be in a
Okay.
position to be believing contradictory claims.
What other claim would I believe by this standard of evidence? What other claim?
Last week, the angel Moroni appeared to me and told me that you were going to call the show. Do you believe me?
No, I don't, and I can tell
Why
you why.
not?
But I've got. But
Why
can I
not?
finish-
You have nothing other than
Can I
my
finish the
claim.
statement? Can I finish the statement, please? Okay, the reason that I believe it because a popular theory to the resurrection is that the disciples lied about it, and this is refuted by social
That's
factors.
not
like
my
kinship.
theory.
Hold on.
That's
I
not
know,
my
but
theory.
hold
I
on.
see no
Could
reason to address it.
I know. I'm about to make an analogy. I'm about to make an analogy. Now, my theory on why you would say that is that you're lying for a specific purpose. Here we have a motive, and we don't have social factors like kinship to refute that. We don't have you dying for your belief, and we do have good attestation, but I'd rely mostly on kinship here. We don't have that kind of evidence, and so the evidence is far better for the disciples than it is for your claim that Moroni visited you last week. Far better. For those two
How
factors
is
that I
it
just
better?
said.
I understand what you're saying about ulterior motives, etc. But you have a book that you don't have any originals of, that you aren't positive who the author is,
Matt,
with
that's
claims in
funny.
it that aren't supported by evidence from elsewhere,
And a long history of spin.
and a long history of other people, of motivation for propagating these particular stories.
Okay, Matt, you said, well, we don't have originals, and I just want to put out we don't have any originals from any manuscript of antiquity. That's special pleading there. You said we don't
It's
know
not
who the author
special
is.
pleading because I'm not comparing it to other things in antiquity.
But, so
I'm talking about standards of evidence.
That's the entire point, though. You're applying a different standard of evidence to this document than you are for others.
No,
So you
I'm
might-
not, because there aren't other
But-
documents that I would
Matt-
accept that make these claims.
So then any document that makes miraculous claims is disavowed by you automatically.
Yes.
Right? Okay,
Yes.
so then how can you claim to be an atheist based on the evidence if you're automatically going to dismiss every piece of evidence to the contrary based on the fact that
I
it's
did not say
naturalistic?
I would dismiss every piece of evidence to the contrary. What I said was that if I would dismiss texts that made that
So-
claim. If
so
there
why
was
would-
additional, you
Why?
better let me finish or I'm going to hang up on your ass. If there was additional supporting evidence, that's the point that I'm getting to, is how do we go about establishing whether or not a claim is supported by sufficient evidence to justify accepting the claim. Text alone, whether it's from an eyewitness or a purported eyewitness or somebody who knew an eyewitness, is not sufficient evidence for me and for, I don't know, a court of law or science or pretty much anybody who's not willing to believe anything they read. Text alone is not sufficient. If there were additional evidence that went along with it, that is worth considering. However, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you tell me that your name is Tommy, I'm willing to accept that on face value with no other evidence required because, for one thing, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your name is Bill or Steve or whatever. It makes no difference to me. If you tell me that you have a pet dragon or a pet dinosaur, that is an extraordinary claim, and I'm going to require more than just your say-so. That's
Okay,
what I'm talking about as a standard of evidence. You put words into my mouth saying that I was willing to dismiss all evidence, and that's not the case. I dismissed a specific type of evidence as insufficient to supporting the claim on its own.
Okay,
Yes.
it seems to be done, so I'll address it. Okay, you said, well, it's not extraordinary evidence, and you say it's not textual evidence isn't extraordinary, but I say it is extraordinary. It's a totally subjective criterion. You can make extraordinary mean anything you want it to mean, and then dismiss any type of evidence you want to dismiss. That's why modern philosophers, do not use ECRI, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, because it's a totally subjective method of assessing evidence. I say that kind of textual evidence, which is multiply attested within over 5 books, that is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 1 Corinthians, is extraordinary evidence. You say, well, we can't accept it because it's textual evidence, but that seems totally arbitrary. Why can't we accept it because it's textual evidence? There's no real reason. It's a non sequitur. There's no connection between your premise, its textual evidence, and conclusion. Therefore, it's not sufficient.
Are you done?
Yes, I am.
If you find that is exceptional evidence sufficient to justify it, then that's your issue. If that's what you find sufficient to justify belief, there's nothing I could possibly say to respond to that. I find that insufficient, and I cannot begin to fathom how people could really find that sufficient.
Could
Sorry.
I respond? Could I respond?
Sure.
Okay. And now you say, well, I find this sufficient. You don't. So are you acknowledging that objectively atheism is not the most reasonable? It will depend on the person.
No.
You're acknowledging.
First of
but
all,
you said it's subjective.
Hang on. First of all, what does atheism have to do with this? This is a rejection of specific claims in the Bible we're talking about, which says nothing at all about atheism.
Okay.
By the way, Jews reject this, and so does everybody who's not a frickin' Christian.
But you're saying that denial of Christianity is not objectively the most reasonable position. It's only subjective, dependent on what one's standards are. Right?
And each individual determines what their standards of evidence are.
Could I ask you why you're on this show preaching that atheism or that denial of the resurrection is very reasonable, and that people who accept it are irrational? Because that's what I've heard from your side, and I just want you to acknowledge that denial of Christianity is not objectively the most rational position.
I have no reason to comment on what is objectively. When I'm on the show and I talk about the issues that I talk about, I'm expressing what my views are, giving my reasons. When people call in, I ask them, please tell me what you believe and why. And we can then have a discussion, because you can, if your evidence is sufficient to justify your belief, then convince me as well. And if I find that your evidence is lacking, then I'm not going to be convinced. Now, whether or not you're getting on sketchy ground when you start talking about subjective evidence versus objective evidence, because there's a number of different ways that you can look at this. What I'm talking about is whether I am not only convinced that my standards of evidence are sufficient to weeding out what is true from what is false, that they are, for the most part, as good as I've been able to discover at doing this particular job. There's a reason why the scientific method requires certain things. Now, there's still an aspect of subjectivity even there, because you, for example, could, and I have no idea if you do, reject the scientific evidence for evolution or Big Bang cosmology or whatever. I have no idea if you do or not. I'm not trying to put words into your mouth. But that is your particular assessment of the evidence. However, working in conjunction, we have established recognized standards by which we make determinations. And those standards, while they would be perhaps subjective in the sense that there is a group of individuals who are debating about what standards should apply and then establishing them, at the point at which they have become established, then they're objective, because they're no longer dependent on any individual.
Okay, let me just respond to this real quick. You
Sure.
said, I just want to clarify, first of all, I do wholeheartedly accept evolution. I do not deny that at all, and the Big Bang, of course. And second of all, you said, well, we have but you said we have recognized standards by which we judge the evidence.
Right.
So, now, don't apply the scientific method to history, because
I wouldn't.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask you, which historical standard that is recognized by a consensus of historians states that textual evidence is not sufficient to establish miracles? Which historical standard? Citation, please.
I have no idea. Is there a historical standard that says textual citations of miracles is sufficient to say that they occurred?
But you were citing specifically your denial of miracles and objectively reasonable using standard historical standards, and I'd say William Lane Craig in particular cites 6 criteria for assessing historical evidence, which are accepted by mainstream historians, which the resurrection passes with flying colors.
No. Historical standards aren't. You're saying that there are historical standards
Like historical methods.
that would confirm, that would state that textual reports of miracles is sufficient to believe that the miracles occurred.
I think that's a corollary of the fact that there are mainstream respected historians who accept the resurrection.
Are you going to answer the question or not?
You said,
Are there historical standards that would state that textual reports of miracles are sufficient to accept that the miracles occurred?
Okay, and here, I think you're the one who has to say that there are historical standards which exclude that, because I'm not the one being excluded.
No, I don't, because my historical standards exclude that, and I'm unaware of any historical standards that would include it. I'm asking you to give me an example of one that does include it, because that's the only way that and by the way, actually, that wouldn't make a bit of difference, but I want to know if such a standard exists, because I'd like to have the rest of the historical community explain this to me as to how this one particular standard could ever say, oh, it's reported in a book and there's a number of different reports about it. In the book itself, we can probably say that it was authored around this time by this person. Therefore, zombies got up out of the grave and walked into Jerusalem.
Well, you asked for a specific historical standard, and sure, I'll give you one.
Okay.
And William Lane Craig cites 2 main criteria, which is explanatory power.
Why are you bringing up William Lane Craig?
Because I'm about to finish my sentence. Hold on just a second. William Lane Craig cites 2 historical standards which are accepted by the mainstream of historians, and you can see it's from a book called The Historical Method, which is not written by William Lane Craig. It's just him citing it. And it's 2 of the main standards are explanatory power and explanatory scope. And mainstream historians, credentialed, respected historians, like N.T. Wright, Craig Evans, etc., will use these criteria to establish a miracle. So because mainstream historians
sorry. They don't. They don't use the standards to establish a miracle. They use the standards to establish that they think that the text is reliable, and then they assert that the miracle occurred. You cannot demonstrate that a miracle occurred without actual evidence of it. Text alone is not sufficient.
You just stated that you wanted a standard used by mainstream historians.
Yeah, and you gave me William Lane Craig quoting 2 criteria.
I gave you mainstream historians like N.T. Wright, who is respected by people as far left as the Jesus Seminar, who uses these criteria to establish a miraculous event. I don't see how this is not fulfilling your criterion. A mainstream historian...
You don't see how this is not fulfilling my criteria?
You wanted a standard that establishes miracles by historians?
I don't want... Okay.
Hello?
Wow. You're giving me names of people who accept that text reports of miracles are sufficient.
Yes, I am.
Okay, that's not what I'm asking for.
That's what you wanted, though.
No, I want a historical standard, not something that a few people or a couple of recognized scholars happen to think is the case. I want a standard, and I want a standard that is a matter of consensus.
Sure. Okay. Explanatory power, explanatory scope. Now,
but you can stop. You can stop.
Explanatory
You
power,
can stop.
explanatory scope. You got an omniscient
No, stop, stop.
God did it.
Stop.
Therefore, it's true.
Stop. No. Hang on. Please. You can stop, actually, because it doesn't matter. If there was the Princeton Guidelines for Historical Review that was a consensus report of all of the historians, or 90% of the historians on the planet, and this guideline said that if there is a textual report in antiquity that, despite whether or not we know who the authorship is, attests to the actual occurrence of a miracle, it is therefore considered historically reliable that the miracle occurred, I would still reject that.
So, like a creationist is willing to go against scientific consensus, you're willing to go against historical consensus, right?
Yes, because history isn't science, as you admitted earlier.
Actually, history is a soft science technically, but I'm not going to go major on that. It's just a technicality, really. But so basically, you're saying
and any science that asserts that miracle claims are justified based on somebody said so is not a science.
So I have a question. You say you basically are implying that science is the only informer of truth. I get claims of miracles from Okay.
What I'm saying is that the
there a higher
scientific
form?
method, the exercise of logic, reason, and evidentiary standards, is the single most consistently reliable method we have for discerning
Yes.
truth from fiction. Nothing else has ever been demonstrated to do better.
Right, and that's referring to philosophy, like logic and reason, and philosophy gets those claims of logic and reason and such. And let me just say that mainstream philosophers as well, and this has become the philosophic consensus, however you say the adjective. This has become the consensus that humane arguments against miracles are not sufficient, and that's why philosophers like Alvin Plantinga have now
Alvin
vigorously-
Plantinga, can you cite anybody who's not an apologist? William Lane Craig, Plantinga. I mean, we've already talked about in previous episodes his modal version of the ontological argument. I mean, can you cite somebody who's not already a Christian apologist who buys this stuff?
You want me to cite people?
Well, no, I don't.
And
No, I don't.
trying to-
No, I
Okay,
don't,
what do you
because it
want?
wouldn't matter. To be fair,
What
it
do you
wouldn't
want?
matter.
So, do you want objective criteria or not?
I want criteria that meets my standards of evidence.
What are your standards of evidence, and why are they superior to all others?
My standards of evidence are, I couldn't possibly list what they are, because for every claim requires different standards of evidence. Not all claims are created equal, as I explained to you before. However, the scientific method is probably the baseline that you could use for establishing this.
The scientific method is derived from philosophy, right?
Possibly,
experience.
it's derived from actual experience.
Which is based on philosophy.
No, it's not based on
Based on the real world.
philosophy. I mean, apart from everything is based on philosophy. You've got no basis for that.
Yeah, well, everything is based on philosophy.
Okay,
and that's
fine.
what-
Thank you
and
for
that's
proving
what-
me right.
No, hold on. Could I finish? Everything is based on philosophy, including science, which means that science is literally enslaved to philosophy.
No, it's not. No, it's not, and that is the dumbest stuff anybody's ever
It
said
is
in the
not
show.
dumb.
Go back
This is
and
why
watch. Go back and watch the episode where I debated tag with Matt Slick, and we can talk about logical absolutes, because I'm not going through all that again. But philosophy, for example, has within it this idea that the senses, for example, are properly basic, something you're probably familiar with.
Yeah.
I reject that claim entirely. The reliability of the senses is constantly re-verified by their application and by their comparison with the other senses and with other information from other people's senses. That's why they're
circular.
reliable, not because they're basic.
You're saying that the senses prove the senses. That's circular, and that's why
No,
they're
it's
properly
not.
basic.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Something
It's
proves
not.
itself.
It's not circular, because I don't stupidly oversimplify it all as the senses. If, for example, there is this cup here, I don't know if you can see it because you may not be watching the stream, and I can see it with my eyes, I can touch it with my hands, I can hear it. If it's a bottle of Coke, I could hear the carbonation escaping, etc. I can see the condensation, I can feel the temperature, I can taste it. It's the interworking of the senses that allow me to create an entire model. But I can also hand this same cup over to Don and have him assess it with his senses. And when we find that we are in agreement, that is where we converge on what we are somewhat justified in asserting as a shared reality. But all of this is far and away removed from the stuff you were talking about before. Science is not this assertion that everything is a slave to philosophy is both true and false, in the sense that everything is dependent on philosophy, because philosophy tries to get to the ultimate source of it. But it's not like if philosophers decided or came to a consensus that textual accounts of miracles should be considered reliable, that science would suddenly start claiming that lab results that reported, bunnies climbing out of test tubes should be taken at face value. That's just not the way reality works.
Okay, well, you refer to science as like testing miracles, quote unquote, and I do love science. I'm not trying to diss science in any way. I accept evolution. So, but
I don't know
science,
how much you accept it if you're going for miracles in text, but
well, I have an account devoted to defending it. But science presupposes methodological naturalism, and that's a principle I agree with.
Right.
Methodological naturalism,
Yes.
but not metaphysical naturalism. So science literally is unable, it is banned from testing miracles. So for you to claim
It's not banned from. It's not banned from testing miracles. It's not banned from testing miracles. No, sir.
In method, it must be natural.
No, sir. In method, yes. In method, it's methodological naturalism, but that doesn't mean that it's banned from testing miracles. If the miracle is something that manifests within reality in any way, it is therefore detectable and measurable by naturalistic methods.
It is? Even if it happened in history?
No, not if it happens in history,
miracle.
because one of the founding principles of aspects of science is repeatability.
Yes, that's right. And so
Miracles
you're
are a
claiming
dodge.
that
It's about prediction, not
You're right.
postdiction.
you're right about that.
I
And
know
that's
I'm
why-
right.
that's
And I
why
was right
think-
in 5 of the things in the video or so, I'm guessing, I'm making up a number, that you pointed out and you wanted to argue against, and you said, oh, he's right, and then you argued against it. We could have probably had a much better discussion if we'd have just picked a point and worked from it. But the funny thing is that when somebody directed me to the video, you seemed to complain about what I was reading from when I talked about the authorship of Matthew. Do you remember doing that?
I'm not sure exactly which point you're referring to there, but
You said, I don't know what he's reading from, but it doesn't seem to have it quite right.
No, I don't remember referring to you reading from something. It didn't seem like you were reading from anything. What I was mentioning...
No. Well, okay, I'm sorry that you don't recall what you said in your own video.
Okay,
but you did, and for the record, what I was reading from was the cover page for the book of Matthew in the New International Version of the Bible.
Okay.
And you objected to it. Now, that's fine. That's fine. You are entitled to object to it. I have my objections about it as well.
I was objecting to your use of the you saying that it's internally anonymous, therefore we don't know who wrote it. I was objecting to that because I pointed out several examples of works which were internally anonymous.
The thing is, here's the thing. There's a difference between saying, give me your first example again, where we learned the authorship from Tertullian.
Tacitus' Annals.
Okay. There's a difference between accepting, like, for example, if Don wrote something, and I knew that he wrote it, a particular essay on the website or whatever, but it was anonymous. And 10 years from now, when somebody comes up to me and says, hey, we want to write a history of, what the ACA did, et cetera, and we've got this, particular essay here that we liked and we'd like to use, can you tell me about it? And I say, Don Baker wrote it. And they record that, and 1,000 years from now, somebody comes along, there's absolutely no risk or price or cost or loss or anything worth tiddling about on my assertion that Don wrote it or on somebody else's assertion that I asserted that Don wrote it. Because the fact that he wrote it doesn't make any difference. It's much like the discussion of what did Socrates actually exist, or was it an invention of Plato to use as a mouthpiece? To me, it doesn't matter. Because what matters is the words that are attributed to him. Do they have value? Are they true? It doesn't matter to me at all whether or not Socrates existed. And so if a historian, half of historians say, yes, he actually existed, and there's sufficient evidence for it, okay, fine. And if the other half of historians say, you know what, there's not sufficient evidence for it, so I don't accept that Socrates existed, that he was real and the author of this, I think it was Plato. Okay, fine, it makes no difference to me because the words that are spoken are either true or not true on their own.
Okay,
the authorship of Matthew is, or any of the Gospels, is such that the only sense in which it matters who the author was is whether or not we're going to claim that this was an eyewitness to it. Not that having an eyewitness necessarily makes the claims true, but there is definitely a reduction in reliability between an eyewitness and hearsay of an eyewitness. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I would agree, but I wouldn't say secondhand evidence is we can't totally throw out secondhand evidence.
And when did I say that?
I was just clarifying. I didn't say you said that or anything.
Okay, fair enough. I wouldn't say that either. So at least there's one little area that we agree on. So now we've got a book, for example, Matthew. In most books, most accounts that we would assess historically, it wouldn't matter to me who the author was. It wouldn't matter to anybody. It might be nice to know who the author was, and it could be reported by somebody else that this guy was an actual eyewitness. But then when we go and investigate, there is the issue of why would an eyewitness rely so heavily on other accounts, which I know you're eager to answer that. I'll let you get to it in a second. But when you address this, it's one thing to say that from the standpoint of normal historical methods and validation, I find that the claim of authorship is justified. And somebody else could say that I find the claim of authorship is not justified.
And that's what the debate is about.
That's what the debate is about. And I'm stating that I'm of the opinion, based on what I've read, that there is sufficient reason to question the authorship.
I know, that's why I'm calling.
And that's all I claimed in that video. And you're admitting that there's a debate about this, which was all I was claiming. And I even got specific and said I don't want to get into the issue of the historicity of Jesus or the specifics about the authorship. Because all I'm saying is that you cannot claim that this is necessarily so. And if you then go and expand to not only, as many believers do, claim that this is necessarily the author, but then to extend that to this necessarily happened, you have committed a huge violation, at least by my standards, of what one should do when assessing evidence for claims.
No, not at all. Now, what the debate is about is, by these historical criteria, did Matthew write Matthew? And I say yes. I say there is absolutely extremely good reason.
And I say I don't know.
I know you say that.
So why did you get so upset? Because I said I don't know.
Dude, I wasn't upset. Someone asked me to respond to it, okay?
Why did you attack me as if I said that he didn't, when you know I said I don't know?
Because you said we don't know who wrote it, and that's essentially a claim that we have no idea who wrote it.
No, it's not a claim.
Okay,
it's not a claim that we have no idea. It's not a claim that there's no debate. It's not a claim that there's no discussion. It was a claim that I don't know who wrote it, and neither does anyone else, at least existing. Somebody probably knows who wrote it. You're convinced that you know who the author is. You've been convinced by some set of evidence. Not everybody's convinced. There is a debate, as you've already admitted. You knew that my position was I don't know, and yet you debunked it as if I asserted, in your own words, that we have no idea. Why did you do that? Why so dishonestly?
No, it wasn't dishonest. My rebuttal
was.
Could I respond? My rebuttal was to you said, well, I don't know who wrote it. We don't have enough evidence to determine who wrote it.
Right.
Right. And so I was saying, no, not true at all. Let's look at your reasons why it's questionable. Let's debunk those. Then let's look at some of the positive reasons why we do know who wrote it.
You didn't.
And
you didn't debunk them.
Yes, I did.
You asserted positions the opposite. As a matter of fact, to just be fair, because this has gone on stupidly long, and I'd be happy to take this offline and have a conversation with you by email, but I want to be as fair to you as possible.
Okay.
So give the YouTube account where you posted this video so the viewers from this show can go watch and see what your rebuttal was. Okay. And we'll also make sure that there's a link up to the specific episode that you're addressing. So when you make fun of me with your pseudo-mongoloid voice, they can actually go watch the original video to see that I did nothing of the kind. So what's the YouTube channel?
The YouTube channel is youtube.com/Kabane the Christian. The YouTube video is entitled A Reply to the Atheist Experience on Matthew.
Yep. All right, there you go. And we'll see about getting a link up with the other video. But Tommy, for now at least, that's way more of the show. There's two other people on hold that have been on hold for a long time, and Don's got a topic to go to, and we're getting nowhere.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure, thanks. Sorry, Don.
Well, that's fine.
I wasn't sure that Tommy was necessarily going to call in. Somebody pointed me to the video where he decided to debunk something that I didn't say, and then go on. But in any case, you can go.
So this is a YouTube response to some clip that
from
one of our shows.
Yeah, where I talked briefly.
Yeah,
briefly.
I should mention that we have almost 800 clips that our fans have put up.
Wow,
it's just astounding. Thank you.
Yes. And by the way, the short YouTube clips are the ones that seem to draw in the most people, which means the clip of that discussion will never make it on YouTube. And I apologize.
You might be surprised.
This is something.